quieres con el pico divertir, cómprame un cucurucho de maní. Cuando las calles solas están, casera de mí.
El grupo de Mujeres Unidas ha estado asistiendo aquí al programa, bueno, al evento aquí de los 100, porque ha tenido éxito en hacer conexiones grandes para llevar a la comunidad. Somos un grupo de mujeres, madres, hijas, y estamos muy contentas de participar y de llevar información a los padres, a los niños y a todas las personas que necesitan información. Los beneficios que ha tenido, pienso que es la comunidad, porque conocemos aquí se puede decir que la organización más directamente, y hacemos esa conexión directamente con los papás o con los niños, y muchas veces con la biblioteca, que también ellos son los que también llevan información a todas las personas. Pues lo que más me ha impactado es cuando hablaron acerca de justicia lingüística, acerca del lenguaje, que es lo que queremos, que toda la comunidad sea bien comunicada respecto a su propio lenguaje, que son muchos los lenguajes, pero especialmente español y algunas otras que están surgiendo, como mixtecos y otros que vienen como de Asia y otros lugares más.
Qué sabrosito y rico está, no se le puede pedir más. Caserita, no te vayas a dormir.
So we thought about sponsoring this luncheon a long time back in discussions with Herman. Land is important for everybody, and the benefits of nature and the benefits of land belong to everybody. And working with Cien has helped us reach out to so many people in the community and helped us really raise these topics and allowed us to talk to people that we haven't had much chance to connect with and talk to. And it's making our movement stronger, and it's making the environmental movement stronger to have all these different voices at the table. Cien is just such a wonderful community resource. They've really connected us with so many partners throughout the community. I love the way that they build bridges and connect people and create conversations that are now being held in spaces where we can really come to the table and talk about all of the issues that matter to all of us. And you know what? We all have the same issues, and together we're a lot stronger. And that's thanks to the way that Cien approaches this. They approach it through bridge building, as I've said, through making friendships, and really convening a social space for us all to convene.
This message corresponds with the values of CHOPS. It fights discrimination, especially among the teen community. I think a common misconception is that there is a place in society for teens to struggle with that sort of thing, because we're not considered adults, so our opinions often don't matter, but we're also not considered children who are allowed to whine or moan about certain things. And so learning how to fight against discrimination, or what it can even look like, I think is really, really important. I enjoy learning a lot of things. I just enjoy knowing things, and I think something like this, which is really valuable to our time, like a lot of people don't understand that racial discrimination, gender discrimination, anything like that can still happen, and it's being ignored because it's not on the same level as it used to be. And so learning what it can look like and how to fight against it is really, really important.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Buenos días, bienvenidos. If you could please silence your phones, please. The program is going to get started now. Welcome to Cien's intersection of environmental justice and equity program. Thank you so much for being here with us today. But before we begin, I have an important announcement that I must make in Spanish. Buenos días y bienvenidos. Si necesita traducción, tenemos audífonos donde se puede escuchar toda la conversación traducida por Betsy Chávez. Por favor, vayan a la mesa donde está Ellen, allá enfrente, y ella les puede ayudar con los audífonos. Muchas gracias a Betsy Chávez por tu ayuda y por estar con nosotros esta mañana. And now we would like to do our land acknowledgement, and we ask you, out of respect, to please rise. Today, Cien Sonoma County is humbled to bring us together on the lands of the Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok people. We celebrate the active work of their descendants to preserve and to nourish their indigenous culture and identity. We acknowledge the Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok people as the traditional stewards and custodians of this region. We honor with gratitude the land itself, all of its ancestors, past, present, and future. Cien respects the enduring relationship that exists between today's Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok people and their traditional territories. Thank you. You may sit now. Once again, thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Arsel Perez. My pronouns are he, him, él, and I am a program committee member with Cien Sonoma County. Today's program could not have been made possible without our dynamic design team of volunteers who we would like to quickly recognize. Fernando Carrillo, Neil Ramis, Gil Seymour, Zeke Ortiz, Kerry Fugett, and Julio Gutierrez. Thank you so much for all of your hard work. And now we want to welcome our students. At this point, if you are a student, we ask that you please stand, and let's give them a nice, warm welcome. Now, we want to welcome our community engagers and parent orgs. If you are a parent or part of a community organization that is part of our Access Ticket program, please stand so we can welcome you. We would also like to recognize our elected officials and elected representatives. We have a ton in the room today, and due to time, we ask that you please stand, and let's also give them a nice round of applause. Due to the feedback that we received from the last couple programs, we want to point to our looping slideshow to make sure that you know who our premier partners are, and as well as our sustaining members, because without their investments and trust, we would not be able to do what we do. So thank you so much. And we also want to give a special shout out to our sponsors for today's program. Presenting sponsor, Sonoma Land Trust, and Friends of Cien sponsor, Sonoma Water. One last reminder. All of our programs and informative events are being recorded by the Nexo Media team. This is exciting because it will allow us to share this with our 3,000 followers and members, so everyone has an opportunity to listen to the conversations. Shout out to Hector Velasquez and the Nexo Media team. Now, I would like to welcome Kerry Fugett, who will introduce our topic and give context to the conversations that we will be having today. Thank you.
It is an honor to be a part of introducing Cien's first ever event on environmental justice with Arsel and our design team. Cien has chosen to unpack this important issue because the health of our environment is the foundation of the health of everything else: our families, our culture, our wildlife, and our future. Malcolm X says it best when he shares that land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. However, we know that not everyone has equal access to healthy land, air, or water. In California, the top 10% most polluted and toxic lands have populations that are 91% people of color. We know this is not by accident, that this is by design, that this is a result of intentional decisions to build fossil fuel industries in redline neighborhoods and split communities in half with highly polluted highways. And we know that not everyone has the ability to meaningfully participate in decisions to address this. In a recent report of 116 environmental and land trust nonprofit boards in California, more than half of these boards have no Latino members. This is also a legacy we face right here in Sonoma County. Today's conversation is about shifting the dialogue when it comes to what does it mean to protect the environment. When we talk about protecting the environment, we can't just talk about Taylor Mountain covered in beautiful wildflowers. We have to talk about Taylor Mountain Elementary School, less than 2 miles away, which is 84% Latinx and in the top 3 most pollution-burdened percentiles of the state. And we have to talk about Cesar Chavez Language Academy, which is 86% Latinx and is severely impacted by heat islands due to climate change, a direct result of inequitable urban development around tree canopies. These environments have a direct impact on education and health. And when we talk about protecting the environment, we can't just talk about protecting beautiful vistas overlooking vineyards. We have to also make sure our farm workers working in those vineyards are protected from heat waves and wildfires as climate change intensifies. And when we advocate for environmental protection, we have to include instigating and leading change within our systems and structures so that communities of color are front and center in the decision-making process about how we address these issues. This means that when our county is updating our groundwater rules and our air quality standards for agricultural workers, that communities of color are centered in this conversation. Today is about recentering as a community on the root causes of our environmental justice issues. Because environmental solutions that don't address racism, white supremacy, and extractive capitalism become band-aids at best and will likely end up causing more harm to communities already bearing the pollution burden for the lifestyles we all enjoy so much. It is within this context that I'm honored to introduce our incredible speakers today. We are so grateful to be joined by Professor Danae Martinez of Africana Studies at San Francisco State University, Merritt College, and College of Marin, with Dr. Omar Ricks, who will lay the foundation of what environmental justice is, help us hold a global view of this topic, and share important historical context within which this work lies. We are grateful to be joined via video by presenter José González, artist and founder of Latino Outdoors, who will talk about ways his work has advanced environmental justice by increasing access to the outdoors in Sonoma County and beyond. We will then hear from Federal EPA Environmental Justice Coordinator CJ Mishima about increasing resources available to fund this incredibly important work. And we are so grateful and honored to close this conversation as well as open this conversation with a powerful dose of inspiration as we hear from Reuben Crowfeather of Standing Rock, Lakota, who will remind us of the power we hold to create change through stories from Standing Rock, one of the largest Indigenous and youth-led environmental justice movements of our time. We realize we are going to cover some difficult topics today. So we invite you to invite curiosity if you feel tense in your body, and remember our breath as a tool to ground and stay present. After our speakers present, we will have Q&A and invite you to submit Q&A through the QR codes on your table or by writing them on 3x5 cards and lifting them up for our volunteers to gather. We also invite you to join us for an extra hour of networking after the program from 1 to 2 in the cafe to unpack the important conversation and topics of the day. But before we begin, we are incredibly honored to be led in prayer by Reuben Crowfeather of the Standing Rock, Lakota, to help us land in this space together in this important conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
How Fopila. How mitake pi chante washte na pe chuzapalo. Reuben kanchi wiaka imachapalo. Ian waslaha hemataha. Honkpapa hemacha. Wana Santa Rosa elwati. Ampetukile lila iomaki piwahilo. My relatives, I greet you with a heartfelt handshake. My name is Reuben Crowfeather. I come from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. I make my home here in Santa Rosa with my family. I'm very humbled and very honored to be here today. I want to thank José first for that beautiful land acknowledgement, and also make my own acknowledgement to our Pomo and Miwok relatives whose land we are residing on here, the original stewards of this land, who for thousands of years lived in harmony with Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, with the water, with the plants, with the animals. Today, I bring a little bit of our Lakota philosophy, where we come from. And our philosophy is centered around Mita Kuye Oyasin. Mita Kuye Oyasin is the acknowledgement that we are all related through one Creator. Whether our skin is dark or light, or our hair is curly or straight, or we speak Spanish, English, Russian, whatever the languages we speak, we're all related through one Creator. We have so many divides that divide us up in our communities, political groups, all these different barriers to becoming unified as one human race. And so today, it's my honor to bring us together, to put our minds together in a prayer. In our Lakota language, we say, "We cho tawa chinwanjila," to be of one mind. Our Lakota word for the mind is tawachin. And tawachin, the literal translation is that what I want. The power of the mind to create, to manifest, is beyond our imagine. Oyate trecha wachinyampi. Our future generation depends upon us. So the things that we do here today and the things that we're going on tomorrow, we want to do those with that spiritual connection with our future in mind. As we talk about environmental justice, what does it mean? I called home to one of my brothers, one of the chiefs at Standing Rock, and he told me, he said, there is no environmental justice. And that was a very powerful statement in itself. So at this time, por favor, de pies, wana inajipua, ask you to please rise. The power of the mind to create life, to protect, all the things that we want to create and to protect, we think about those things. When we came into this world, we have a mama, we have a papa. Maybe we're blessed with siblings. Maybe one day we're blessed with children. Mita kuye oyasin, all of our relations depend upon it. When we think of mita kuye oyasin, it's more than just hunumpa, the two-legged. Wama kanshkan oyate is all that walks on this earth. Kian oyate, all that flies. Nue oyate ki, all that swims in the water. We believe Miniwi choniki, the sacred water of life, has its own spirit. We believe Wo Onia Wakanki, the sacred air that we breathe, has a spirit. Unchimaka, the Mother Earth that we live upon and provides us everything that we need, is a spirit. Even the fire, Petawakanki, that sacred fire that we have in each of our communities. So with that thought in mind, thinking about all of our relations, we're thinking about Mother Earth, thinking about protecting the water, protecting the air, protecting the land, protecting our future. I asked you to pray along in your own minds. And maybe you could close your eyes and really pray hard, you know, like, pray real hard like that. The song that I'm going to sing, Tonk Ashila Washak Mayayo, is Grandfather, give me strength. Grandfather, give me strength. On this day, give me strength. Because we need that spiritual strength, Wo Washaka, to continue to go forward. So many of our relatives, they don't have that spiritual strength and they fall to the wayside. We think about all our relatives homeless on the streets dealing with mental illness. We think about all of our relatives who are incarcerated, institutions, fighting addictions, the drugs, alcohol, depression, all those things. We become the spiritual warriors, each and every one of you. It's not just Reuben Crowfeather, it's each and every one of you is just as important and powerful, and your prayer, your thought, your heart is just as important. So at this time, I'm going to sing this song, and I want you to envision that beautiful future. Envision that beautiful future for your children, for your grandchildren. We're taught to think 7 generations ahead, so your grandchildren's grandchildren. And through the prayer of your grandmothers and your grandfathers, that's how you are here today. You know, so we think about our relatives that went on before us and the one that are coming behind us. Tonka shela washak mayayo hai. Tonka shela washak mayayo hai. Tonka shela ampe dokile washak maya yo hai hom. Tonka shela washak maya yo hai. Tonka shela ampe dokile washak maya yo hai. Can you say Mita? Kuye. Oya. Cien. A lot of people learn our ways and they say it really fast. They make it all one word. They rush it. But you learned how to say it really nice today. Mita. Kuye. Oya. Cien. Mita, mine. Kuye, my relatives. When we say Oya Cien, that's when we collect all life, and that's very important. The most powerful prayer for our people is when we just say Mita Kuye Oya Cien. So I thank you all for your kind attention, for your thoughts, for your prayers, and for all the work that you do. I want to say Wopila muchos gracias to Lo Cien for having me here today. Oh, hecha tu alo.
Thank you so much for that prayer. I am honored to introduce our first speakers for this program. Please join me in a warm round of welcome to Professor Danae Martinez, Africana Studies of San Francisco State University, Merritt College, and College of Marin, joined by Dr. Omar Ricks, who will be giving us a foundational understanding of environmental justice and environmental racism at all scales. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I realize we're here to talk about some not so easy stuff, but we first want to, acknowledge the land that we're on, as well as the people who came together to work really hard to make this happen, as well as our contacts, Celeste Winders and Kerry Fugett. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. Also, we wanted to say that we're scholars of racism. That's part of how we come at this environmental justice, environmental racism issue. We of course are trying to analyze the problem. So the stuff we talk about is not going to be pleasant because we're doing a diagnosis of what the problem is. If you do not diagnose the problem correctly, you will never address it. You will never solve it. And so part of how we refer to race and racism is in our way as kind of scholars of race, we refer to it in ways that may be unfamiliar to people who are used to thinking in certain ways. We do not. We will mention indigenous or First Nations. We will mention Black, the descendants of enslaved peoples in the Americas. But we do not necessarily talk about Latinx as its own race, because we feel that the way that many people think of Latinx as a race in itself tends to erase indigenous Latinx people, tends to erase Black Latinx people. And so we want to make sure people know we are talking about you if you identify as Latinx. We are just disaggregating it into certain categories that are related to the project of colonialism and the genocide and enslavement. So we just wanted to acknowledge that, right?
So we're here to talk today about environmental racism, right? And get into the politics, ecocide, and the racist structure.
Click it that way.
There. Okay.
So what do you think of when you hear the term environmental racism? We're going to kind of do this by sort of, you can go thumbs up if you think of it as environmental racism, thumbs down if you don't think of it as environmental racism, or kind of a sort of, Malcolm X thinking posture, right? If you're not sure, right? So environmental racism often looks like Black, indigenous, and brown people protesting conditions that are already polluting and poisoning our communities, our homes, and our bodies. In other words, most of the time when we talk about environmental racism, we're talking about racially discriminatory acts that pertain to the environment, that use the environment, right? We're usually talking about, sorry, let me make sure everybody can sort of see it. I'll stand back a little. Now I'm in somebody else's way. All right. Well, just kind of listen, please go along for the ride. Right? We're usually talking about an environmental way of being racist, right? But what about this? And I don't know if there's any 49ers fans in here. I know people say, the saying is you don't make Jesus jokes in Jerusalem, right? But I don't want to I don't want to offend anybody, right? But there is some truth to why it is named after 1849, right? That we need to think about. The San Francisco 49ers are named in celebration of groups of white settler colonizers, many of whom committed horrific acts, right? Genocide, ecocide, enslavement of indigenous people, right? All during the California Gold Rush of 1849, right? Is this environmental racism?
What's your thoughts? Thumbs up, thumbs down, or
Okay.
And what about this? First Nations, Aboriginal, and other indigenous peoples have long fought to maintain their traditional practices for forest management and preventing massive wildfires. But settler societies in the US, Australia, and elsewhere outlawed them for a long time. Is this environmental racism?
And what about this? Risks of flooding are higher, and deadly urban heat islands are more common in black, brown, and indigenous areas. In other words, flooding and deadly urban heat islands are racialized. Is this an example of environmental racism?
And what about this? Take a look over here. You can see these are drone shots. This is a drone shot in South Africa. Black people live in the area that you don't see green space, and those same black people can't even go into that other area today, for the most part, in that green space. Same thing with Brazil. What we call the luxury effect. Access to green space is highly racialized in the US and across the globe, and lack of access to green space routinely undermines the physical and mental health of brown, indigenous, and black communities. Is this environmental racism? Absolutely, good. And what about this? During a desperate water shortage, which they're actually having right now, as hundreds of mostly black and colored South Africans wait in long lines to use a few shared water taps. When I say a few shared water taps, I'm talking about 10 for 300,000 people. Many white South Africans get private wells drilled in their own backyards to get priority access to water for luxuries like backyard swimming pools and flower gardens. Is this an example of environmental racism?
And what about this? This famous painting, artist John Gast painted it called American Progress in 1872. It makes manifest destiny look bloodless. Notice the, can you click it one more time? Notice the, there we go, arrow pointing. Angelic looking white woman and the settlers and wagons and railroads traveling with her across pristine wilderness. And then press it again.
I did.
Okay, thank you. Also notice the indigenous people fleeing into obscurity, into literal darkness, right? As if just voluntarily, right? Is this an example of environmental racism? No.
And what about this? Sheep may seem unlikely instruments of genocide, but together with the cattle that trampled edible plants and fouled the water holes, they were the innocent embodiment of historical pressures which wrought massive and irremediable destruction. The tide of strange animals loosed on the Aborigines, carefully tended grazing lands, displaced the Aborigines' game and the Aborigines themselves. And this is by Tony Barta. We get this from Tony Barta, Relations of Genocide, Land and Lives in the Colonization of Australia. Is this environmental racism?
And what about this? A lot of prisons and jails in the United States are built in areas with a high risk for flooding and for extreme heat, as well as wildfires, which we know about here in California, right? And inmates are often not evacuated during emergencies, right? Given who's most likely to face incarceration, is this an example of environmental racism?
And this, if modern slavery were a country, it would be disproportionately black and brown. It would have the population of Canada, and it would be the third largest emitter of CO2 after China and the USA. And the people it served would be disproportionately non-white. Is this environmental racism? Don't give out on me now. You got to put up your...
Yeah. And this is a quote from Guns, Germs, and Steel by the geographer Jared Diamond. Neil Diamond, I was about to say. Come on now. All right. But the African way of life was designed to avoid mosquito-borne infection. Africans made their homes, traditionally, right, in high, dry areas when they could, away from the natural habitat of the mosquito. and they often grouped them into smaller groupings of people, right? So there wasn't as big of a target for mosquitoes. Unfortunately, with the arrival of colonizing Europeans wreaked terrible damage on these centuries-old mechanisms of survival. Torn from their villages, forced to live and work together in massive numbers, right? And in unsanitary conditions, tropical Africans fell ill as never before. I know this is something we usually think of malaria as just something that kind of goes with the territory in Africa. No, it is an introduction of colonization. The scourge of malaria throughout Africa today, Diamond says, is in part the consequence of the destruction of a way of life which had existed for thousands of years. And I'm not even going to ask y'all, but you know that's environmental racism right there. Right?
And this, rich white countries live unsustainably, while poor black and brown countries have the smallest carbon footprints of all nations. People in wealthier, whiter nations emit 50 times more greenhouse gas per person than those in poor black and brown nations. As the consumption of white communities increases, the fine particle pollution called PM 2.5 increases in black and brown communities. Is this environmental racism? So as you can see here, we're looking at the traditional way of looking at environmental racism, but we want to expand it. It's much bigger than how we have traditionally thought about it. It comes not just from dumping pollution next to black people or next to indigenous people. It came with the colonial project itself. But first, before we go into that, I want to just talk a little bit about what racism is so that we don't get it twisted. First of all, race is an invented way of ranking people. It is not just, categories. It's an invented way of ranking people with some on top and some on bottom, based on similarities and differences in certain aspects of their appearance. Racism is a power structure and socially constructs, creates, and reinforces racial categories that we now recognize, like black, white, Asian, Indian, categories that have very real consequences. So, race is made up, but racism is very real. Race is a power structure created and maintained by both extreme violence and hegemony. Race would not exist without the racism that maintains it. But it also needs oppressor and oppressed to kind of play along. Makes it a little easier if people can buy in to their own oppression. So first it happens through extreme force and naked violence used by civilians, police. This force is always at work, even when it's temporarily suspended. And then there's hegemony. The stories designed to make us consent to racism by normalizing it and making it seem ridiculous to question the racial order. These stories are carried by word of mouth, schools, religion, media, entertainment, social media, sports, arts, all kinds of stuff. Remember, racism happens on many different scales. And we want to do a little bit of a demonstration so that you really understand this one, because it's commonly misconstrued. Okay? First, it happens on the individual level. Take a look here. This is a yellow little clay. The individual level is the thoughts you have about yourself and those most like you, often called internalized racism. Now, this is the most common one that people think is racism, is interpersonal, and it's probably one of the least worst, even though it's really bad. Interpersonal, when someone discriminates against you because you are black or non-white. And you can see here we've got a different color. Institutional, this is the one that most people talk about. When a school, organization, business, or government engages in policies or practices that impact you because you're black, indigenous, and brown. Now, the thing is that a lot of people use the word structural to talk about it as if it's institutional. No, structural is something totally different. It makes up all three of those mixed together. And when you mix it together, like he's doing, right, it makes something new and more dangerous. And as it keeps mixing over generations and generations, it's really hard to pull it out and just target one, just target institutional, and see if and make things change. You have to target the entire structure. Institutional racism often takes the form of businesses, organizations, as educational institutions, or government agencies working to uphold the racist structure through seemingly race-neutral laws, policies, or practices. Most often, race is not explicitly named in environmental policy and practice. To understand environmental racism, we must also understand structural racism. Again, structural racism is when a global racist power structure is reinforced through state and non-state institutions, called institutional racism, interactions between people, interpersonal racism, and the thoughts and feelings of individuals, internalized racism. And again, it makes something new. Remember, racism shapes the bad as well as the good. Don't forget it shapes the good, okay? Because it shapes who the good is good for. It is environmental racism when Black and Indigenous people live disproportionately in places with environmental hazards. It is environmental racism that the main places Black and Indigenous people can find to live are in areas with natural and built environmental hazards. But it is also environmental racism that white people benefit from white people disproportionately live in places with clean air and water. White people as a whole benefit from environmental racism. When a society grows from a genocide, environmental destruction can be held up as an ideal. In societies built on slavery and settler colonial genocide, ecocide, the destruction of ecosystems, is normalized as the American way of life. The right to destroy the biosphere is sanctified in law and cultural practice. Yes, people can actually become psychically and culturally invested in destructive ecocidal practices even after they understand them to be destructive, especially when they think the only people harmed will be people they view as subhuman or non-human. And right here, a good example of that is driving. So now we kind of got an idea of what racism is, but now let's learn a little bit about what is environmental racism.
Okay, and you can click to the next one. So thinking about environmental racism in the same ways that we think about racism, right? Thinking about racism structurally, we need to go over like the standard definition, which is environmental racism is the social injustice represented by disproportionately large number of health and environmental risks cast upon people of color in the communities in which they live. These minorities are the most common victims of things like toxic landfills, waste incinerators, industrial dumping, uranium mining, and other environmentally detrimental activities. You can click to the next slide. Thanks. As a practice, whether purposeful or unintentional, whether purposeful or unintended, right? Environmental racism is often reinforced by government, legal, economic, political, and military institutions, right? Because it occurs simultaneously with other racial inequities, high poverty rate, deteriorating housing, and infrastructure, economic disinvestment, inadequate schools, acute unemployment, and poor or inaccessible medical services. This is from a 1995 report called Environmental Social Justice for All, right? Oops, uh-oh. But if racism is a structure, is environmental racism a structure too? Yes, yes. We definitely need to understand how the human relationship to the environment, the human need for things like what are called ecosystem services, different uses that people have for what the environment is and provides to us for living, right? All of that can be disrupted by an environment, by a racist structure, right? The important thing to remember is this: race ranks lives. Race is a ranking of life, right? It is invented and maintained as a technology. Race is a technology, right? A social technology, specifically to do that, to rank the life of people, right? So we can click through to the next slide, I think. So a concept that I want to make sure you understand is what's called necropolitics. Necropolitics is a concept developed by this man, Cameroonian political theorist, Achille Mbembe. He developed the concept to describe the ways that power structures produce death, right, as part of their regular functioning, right? That they need certain people to die. That's their first consideration. And some of us may have seen that if we're like essential workers, for example, and during the COVID pandemic, there were all these politicians in the news talking about, well, we need to go back to work so we can save the economy for my grandchildren, right? Never mind that said politician never actually himself or themselves, right? They won't, they're not concerned about their own health. They're taken care of, right? But people who don't have health care, they're not concerned about, right? You can click through. You can click through again, just to rush it along. Yeah, that's one of said politicians, and you can click through from that one. And here's another of said politicians, and he didn't like so much that he said that after he said it, but he did say something about, hey, 2 to 3% mortality among school children is not such a bad thing. Well, we'll see. Yeah, we'll see what he thinks about having said that. But look, I want to try to rush through this a little bit. Necropolitics isn't just actions that happen during the pandemic or during these sort of discrete emergency situations. It's important to remember it is built into the way the society is structured. It is a fundamental part that the first consideration that was made in developing America or in developing South Africa or developing Australia, other settler colonies, the first consideration is not who should live, who should we protect. It is who should die, who has to be killed, who do we have to get out of the way to even have this land, right? Where then we can propound about how all men are created equal. Who do we have to enslave, to kidnap and de-indigenize from their own land so that we can enslave them to develop this land? Who do we have to do that to so that we can have this land to say all men are created equal, right? That's the first consideration of a necropolitical order. You can click through. Thanks. And this is something with which many people are familiar. Some quotes among the black tradition for sure. Audre Lorde talking about litany for survival and how we were never meant to survive, how this kind of social order is created, that we are defying that and resisting that social order, we are resisting that power structure simply by surviving, right? And so we have to speak out about it, right? You can click through. Thanks. Let's see. You can click through again. Thanks. Let's click through again, I think. And any approach to environmental racism has to acknowledge the ways that a society that's founded on genocide and slavery is inherently ecologically unjust, and so we're going to have to resist that structure in order to bring about environmental justice. Let me just skip through here. Which button?
No, it's the other one, yeah. I'll do this. Okay. So one of the things is we got to be real careful, even in the environmental justice movement, because we can do more racism even in those movements. Happens often. And here's a great example of that. Conservation, many times, is about what settlers want. John Muir wanted to establish Yosemite National Park because he wanted bourgeois white people to have a place to come restore themselves away from the cities. A few Miwok people were allowed to stay in the park, their ancestral homeland, serving as guides for white visitors. But establishing Yosemite forced the Miwok people off the land they had lived on for thousands of years. Muir had a disdain for the Miwok people, calling them hideous. This happens all over the world, including in South Africa. Starting during apartheid, there was a push by South African white people towards conservation. This protected the plants and the animals at the expense of the Africans. Black people kept out of conservation sites or were given inferior facilities. Black people were also displaced to create white-only spaces for conservation. They protected plants and animals, but not black children and people. This is not justice and did not stop the problem. South Africa has actually been on the forefront for movements and rethinking the way we think about environmental justice, something called critical environmental justice. Genocide of indigenous and black people and destruction of their ecosystems went hand in hand. This requires a new concept called ecocide. Ecocide is the destruction of ecosystems, whether intentionally or not. Because people rely on their ecosystems for survival, genocide, the death of a group of people, often goes hand in hand with ecocide. Okay. Should we just, yeah. So here are 4 key takeaways. You want to do it or you want me to? Takeaway number 1, we need to expand our understanding of what environmental racism is. It's not just pollution dumped near people of color. It's baked into the colonial project, which we still live with every day today. Takeaway 2, racism is a power structure that structures our world into a privileged group that lives well at the expense of the non-white world. One benefits because it takes from the other. There is a relationship. It's not just happening that some people get things and some people don't. It's one gets it on the backs of the other. Do you want to do the rest?
Real quick. Takeaway number 3, colonialism has always used environment as a technology of racism to structure the world into who gets the good, green, luscious, healthy, fertile environment, and who gets the barren, dangerous environment that causes premature death. That is structured into colonialism, right? And takeaway number 4, racism against black and indigenous people is inextricably linked to ecocide. If you want to destroy a people, and we didn't get to go over the slides there, but the U.S. Army, for example, destroyed many herds of bison in order to subjugate the indigenous people who were resisting in the plains. And they also, George Washington, of course, drained the swamp, before it was a campaign slogan, drained the swamps in Virginia and North Carolina, partly because he wanted to help expand the land that was available for plantation agriculture, and also partly because enslaved and indigenous people would hide out in the swamps. That was where we would escape to, right? So, last word?
Okay. So just for a last word, understanding structure helps us to struggle for justice. It's survival pending revolution. The Black Panther Party had this saying, and what they used to say is, we have to do survival. That's why they had all those programs, you know, breakfast programs, all that kind of stuff, to help the people to survive. But they always kept in mind that ultimately the goal is revolution. Yes, we need to act locally, but if we don't work on ways to battle structures like racial capitalism, we will literally be running to put out fires and never destroying the problem. Because this is a global structure that creates this, we have to create a new structure so that we aren't constantly chasing fires. Thank you for having us. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Danae and Dr. Ricks. We would like to remind you all that there are QR codes on your tables. If you have any questions for any of the presenters, please submit them there, or you could also write them on the index cards. For our next presenter, he was not able to show up today due to a last-minute invitation to the White House, so José González will not be able to be here, but he has sent us a video, and we will link that to the following email regarding the program today, so you guys could check it out.
Hola, buenos días. My name is José González, and I'm going to take a little bit to share a little bit what I kind of consider environmental justice orientations. This should complement, of course, and add to what is being shared by our other presenters. So please know that in that way. And we're limited by time, so there's always all kinds of other things we can go on. So to start, I want to kind of acknowledge that we'll be approaching kind of like what is environmental justice. And part of this role here is to both look at the larger context of how we're tackling systemic, historical, and structural oppression, while also knowing that it can spread across disciplines. It's interdisciplinary. It has a history. It has an academic practice. It has like real work on the ground, and all of us kind of play a role in it. And to start, I often think about an example like April 22nd, 1970. So this date is coming up. And you look at these two pictures, and on the right, you see planet Earth. And on the left, you see some kids planting a tree. And you could think of both of these as like, here are some Earth Day events. And yet the Earth picture is symbolic of Earth Day. And at the same time that the first Earth Day was launched in April 22nd, 1970, we have the founding of Chicano Park. And so that picture is actually of Chicano Park. It's not an Earth Day event, and yet they're happening at the same time. And to me, it's kind of indicative about how we've both been part of the work, but maybe not always seen as part of the movement. And part of that is because we're both for the people and the planet, and the way that our comunidades really value open spaces, but not just for the sake of having green space, because it's also a social cultural place. Another one I often think is when we think about the book Silent Spring, for example, and Rachel Carson as both the writer and the scientist. If you're familiar with this narrative, with this story, it's an important kind of American environmental movement inflection point. There was a clear call to action to be able to say, hey, we got to stop DDT because it's impacting the ecological landscape. Basically, it's killing the birds, it's thinning their eggshells, and we have to do something about it. And so the narrative that kind of came out of this was, this is even 25 years after, in 1997, and what's only kind of even recently really changing, is that here we go. The founders of Environmental Defense Fund brought about this original DDT lawsuit in Suffolk County, New York, where they showed the ospreys were having poor reproductive success, and eggs that had not hatched contained high concentrations of DDT. The lawsuit ultimately led to the nationwide ban on DDT on June 14, 1972. And so that's kind of the environmental story. And yet what's kind of often left out is the fact that EDF wasn't the only organization kind of suing to ban DDT. At the same time, you had the California Rural Legal Assistance, CRLA, suing on behalf of migrant farm workers in California. And this is important because at that time, and even now, but especially at that time, nature didn't have standing in court. People had standing in court. And so the fact that you could prove impact on people really was able to advance the case that also benefited in terms of what EDF was stating as the impact on nature, on the birds. And so this is important because at that time we said it's a marriage of convenience rather than really strategic or redefining the issue about like, hey, DDT harms people and our non-human kin, birds. And so we missed that. And so we often say, well, what's up with that? Because many of us know that farm workers kind of routinely and systematically have been excluded from a lot of the protections, whether it's labor, whether it's environmental, whether it's housing, like you name it. And CRLA actually had handed off the case to EDF, which then took it, and that really contributed to the success. And part of what we often acknowledge is that, we often say that right here, it says pesticides, while an important issue in their own right, became a metaphor for the larger power struggle that such a subaltern group as farm workers had the audacity to challenge agribusiness methods. So that's when we get into that element of power. These are some of the source books if you're interested in reading more. And so I share that because when we look at environmental justice, of course, it's addressing environmental injustice and looking at both the field, the research, and the movement that promotes environmental and social economic justice. So there is a people component by recognizing that direct link between the economics of it, the environmental health issues, and ultimately what is reparative action? Like, what do we do about it? How do we fix this? There are several definitions, and a common one, of course, is the EPA, kind of like the fair treatment. And this matters, of course, how we support policy definitions, because those are the processes by which we allocate resources. So it is important to really look at how these definitions not just work in the movement, not just work in academics, but how they show up as policy. For this, I'm kind of acknowledging, as we're looking at this work, at least kind of three components. One is really recognizing disproportional impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Two is that we know that these communities tend to care more about environmental policy solutions. So we're already willing and interested, but there's different elements of structural power that doesn't always allow us to manifest that. And that this leadership has been present in the environmental conservation movement. And it's often buried, oppressed, under-highlighted, forgotten, just as those migrant farm workers and their role. They're part of the story in the DET ban that benefited the birds. And for me, my entry point into a lot of this work is kind of in the outdoor nature sustainability. But that's all part of this, for me, the same picture. It's about our relationship to land. And what does that mean to be in this relationship to land that isn't just extractive, that isn't just what I call a utilitarian reductionism. It's just the land is only there to be used. And then a couple of other framings around that is the reality of doing this work is grounded in the reality of their kind of demographic inevitability, or as we say, take California, which is now a plurality Latino. That means it's the largest kind of demographic group. And by 2050, the United States is going to be kind of this plurality of quote unquote minorities. And so the demographics of 2050 are very different than 1950. So that means it affects not just the people that are here and who's affected and who's represented, but also who is represented in these positions of power, in these decision-making spaces. So as an elected official, as someone that makes the policy, as someone that heads a foundation, as individuals that are now there in these places of power that weren't there before. And so that comes both with the opportunity and responsibility to say, as the Latino community, as we know, we are part of the environmental solution just as much as we're part of the environmental impact, just as much as we have our own role in environmental history. And I often kind of say this example about unpacking a little bit of some of this work, because if we just presume that people don't care or they're not connected to it, we can kind of continue and perpetuate these inequities. And so take, for example, here, this question about, hey, what's your interest in the following activities? What's your interest in hiking? And if you just ask hiking, people might kind of respond to that in this way. And a takeaway could be like, well, look, here at 19%, the Black identified demographic, they don't care as hiking about as much. But yet, if you ask the question, what about walking outdoors? They all shoot up. And so what's the difference between hiking and walking outdoors? Physically, we're asking your body to kind of be in the same practice. And so it allows us to think about some of these social constructs, the terms that we use for which people connect or disconnect. And so environmental justice plays a huge role in letting people know you're part of this work too. It isn't only about the, protecting scenic wildscapes. It isn't only about caring about the birds. We want you to acknowledge how you as humans were part of environmental work. And I used before this term about kind of utilitarian reductionism because I share this as some of the language that's present in our movement work, and to think about how environmental justice and environmental injustice work comes out of all of these isms, these ideologies of oppression like racism, sexism, and so forth. And they're interwoven kind of in the system of harms. This is off of the work of Dr. Rupa Maria. And we'll use a term like colonization to kind of describe how it's driven so much of what we've inherited in all of these ways that harm us. And yet, if we flip that to a life-honoring worldview, so instead of looking at colonization with this reductionist mechanistic logic that says, I'm going to treat the land, I'm going to treat the trees, I'm going to treat other people as things, as objects, as things that I can, justify being harmful to them, to think about life-honoring worldview, which many of our communities have had, all our indigenous native communities have had this relationship of saying it isn't just a natural resource, it's a natural relative. And so if those trees are, your primos también, what does that mean about caring for them with that responsibility? You can still use them. You can still cut them down to make the houses y todo eso, pero how can we be responsible to not only reduce them in that way, because that shows up in how we reduce people as well. And then lastly, kind of these ideas that this shows up kind of on lines on the map that have consequences. And redlining is a classic example of this, because even though it started in housing, it shows up very much in everything else. And then the Bay Area, it's no exception, because this isn't just about intentions and like people choices. This is the structural elements that we often talk about, that we've inherited all of this. And it wasn't just by people saying, well, I choose to live here versus over there. There's other elements at play in terms of individual bias, discriminatory practices, whether you get the loan or not, how the funding is allocated, and even what gets written in the loan documents about who could own that home and not. And this is just in the 1950s, 1960s, 70s. So this is within a generation. And so in the Bay Area, and even a place like Marin, just south of Sonoma, you have this clear separation of amazing scenery and nature. And yet it is one of like the highly segregated counties in terms of where people live. And so these are some of those aspects of environmental justice that isn't only clean air, clean water, and so forth. It is those, and I often say it is kind of access to all of the benefits of nature and how we have that relationship to land. And so why this is important is because redlining wasn't just about housing. It shows up in so many other things, such as our health outcomes, our access to green space, how hot our neighborhoods are. If we don't change to these maps, that we get to inherit them, and then they keep showing up in all these different ways. This is, for example, at the top, you have the redlining maps, and at the bottom, you have emergency department visits. And you can just kind of see that direct correlation. And then this impacts redlining, like I said, it impacts all these different ways. But in relation to our outdoor nature and access work, it affects just the nature that's around you. And so when we talk about the ecological and evolutionary consequences of systemic racism in urban environments, it's really saying, how do these redlining maps affect even the nature that shows up in your neighborhood? And so these maps now are an important base of research because they're there. It is the structural element. Like I said, it wasn't just people choosing to live in one area or another. There were push factors, policy push factors, economic push factors that were mandating really people as to where they could live. And this can affect, right, the nature, the ecology of that landscape. And so that is an environmental justice issue as well. And then I had mentioned that a lot of our data and research shows that communities of colors consistently care about better environmental policies, actions, outcomes. And so it's an invitation to really step into that decision-making role and challenge what prevents us from being in those decision-making roles, because this is our community are kind of saying, we're in, so vamos, what are we doing? And the final piece, which I know some of our other presenters are sharing, is that environmental justice kind of as this this historical reality has many different territories, while acknowledging, of course, the importance of leadership by particular communities, and especially Black leadership in terms of their centering as the civil rights movement provided a strong source of spirit experience and leadership to environmental justice. At the same time, you had other tributaries that included the labor movement, native sovereignty movement, and the anti-toxic movements, some elements of academia. So just know that we have these, and let's recognize some of this leadership. One of the main ones being Warren County in North Carolina, kind of this 1982 protest. This is Black communities led by local church officials were out there on the streets and saying, you're not going to put this toxic site in our neighborhoods. I had mentioned the DDT and the farm workers were often kind of written out of the story. And yet this is the story that I was sharing earlier about we've been part of that, but we haven't always been included or seen as part of the leadership. And then in 1990, the letter to the Big Ten, where all of these grassroots environmental justice communities kind of wrote a letter to the big environmental organizations and say like, hey, what you're kind of promoting is nice and all, but it's so quote unquote nature focused without the people. And as the people are part of nature and we have these realities of negative impacts on our communities, we want to be a part of this too. Are you in or are you out? And they didn't get a good response. And so 10 years after that, we got to kind of keep it working. And it's slowly changing and has been changing. You have organizations like the Sierra Club, for example, have finally embraced it. But this isn't new. This is part kind of our history and work. And so, para cerrar, I just think of it as kind of this multifaceted jewel when it comes to environmental justice. Reparative action, justice is like, how do we restore the whole? If injustices takes away, if it causes a harm, what does reparation look like? And we can look to some of the leadership within our communities and some of our colegas to do some of this solidarity work. So Native Land Conservancies, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Indigenous Environmental Network, both from far away and close, right down in our own communities as well. And so, gracias. This is the way that I often close my work through art también, because it plays a role. So, here is a piece of mind that kind of illustrates both our current relationship with land through outdoor labor. And I want to expand from outdoor labor to outdoor leisure and outdoor love, even as we're impacted with pesticides, for example, all of these elements that our farm worker communities may be affected by. And there's additional readings here that if you're welcome to follow up, this is only one piece. There's so many, many, many more. And of course, what our other colegas and presenters will be sharing. Gracias so much. I apologize that I couldn't be there with you all today. I actually have a White House environmental justice event visit that came last minute. And I look forward to staying connected. Muchas gracias.
And next we have CJ Mishima from the EPA. We would like to welcome up to the stage.
Thank you. And thank you for taking me back to class. I learned so much, oh my goodness, and I think that probably perhaps for the presentation from the Environmental Protection Agency. My name is CJ Mishima. And before I get into my talk, I'm born in San Francisco, and I was raised in the East Bay. I think my early interactions with environmental justice was through my family history. I'm Japanese American, and a lot of my grandparents were in the internment camps. I remember hearing stories from my grandparents about their lived experiences in the internment camps, and was just always thinking about this group of people who were forced to live in the most uninhabitable place in the U.S. They were located in Topaz, Utah. I actually got to go visit last year and got to stand where my grandparents were living for a long period of time, and just couldn't think how a group of people were forced to live in a place like this in the most arid environment, and it was just very eye-opening. But I remember early on that really caused me to have a life and career in the environmental sector of protecting human health in the environment. And as you see, my title is Environmental Justice Coordinator. You're probably like, what is that? What does he do? I am by no means the expert in environmental justice. That was our amazing presenter just now. And the people in this room, you are all environmental justice warriors, and I'm just here to make sure that our agency abides by the principles of EJ in our own work. EPA has historically, have screwed up in many, many ways, and I'm here to try to fix those wrongs in one way or another by just pursuing EJ as a career. So I just want to thank you for giving us that amazing talk, and I really value your experience. And maybe we can chat on the side again later, and you can come give EPA a presentation on EJ. Next slide. Oh, I have a thing. Okay. Down. So, just starting off with our definition of environmental justice, it is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. EPA is a funding agency as well as a regulatory agency. But we really want to abide by those two key words, fair treatment and meaningful involvement. So fair treatment, obviously, is just no group of people should bear a disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences. And again, I want to acknowledge that EPA hasn't been perfect in its many, many years in its existence. And I've only been with the EPA for 3 years, but I do realize I was stepping into a role that bears a large, large history that caused a lot of distrust with communities that have been hit with a lot of environmental issues. And then meaningful involvement. I mean, how many times have people in this room or communities have expressed their issues, expressed what's going on the ground, whether it's asthma from bad air or bad water, and nothing happens from you continuously telling us what's going on. So meaningful involvement to me really means that we're listening, but not just listening, that we're going to develop actions through hearing from your expert knowledge. People in this room are the experts, and we want to hear from your experience of what's going on. If we don't incorporate your knowledge into our decision-making processes, then we're going to go nowhere. I feel like EJ is part of that. It's where we have the tools, the knowledge, and everything else to make real change, but our process is what needs to change. I think it's what the professor was saying beforehand, that we have these barriers in our systems that are embedded, and I just saw that clay example, and I was like, oh my God, that's the EPA. She just mushed it all together, and it's really hard just to take the bits and pieces that have been ingrained in our existence for the last 50 years. But again, when I first joined EPA, environmental justice, the term was just a thought still, and that was 3 years ago. I think it was a volunteer type work. We had a few grants here or there, but since then, we've gotten so much support from my senior staff, from our administration, to actually invest in environmental justice as a component of our work. Next slide. So again, this is just a simple slide of how we view communities that have EJ concerns. We realize it's a cumulative impact type situation. Not one community is dealing with one issue. I feel like we don't want to pit communities to get against each other either. We're all fighting for the same right of healthy land, water, and air. And we want the places that you live in to be safe. We don't want the park you go to cause your kids asthma, and we want to acknowledge that. Oh, that's a boring slide, sorry. It's EPA Region 9, and if you don't know, we cover California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands, and 148 federally recognized tribes. And so that's just a little background, I suppose, but boring. Next. But here, so this is a little glimmer of hope. Again, when I started, oh my God, I have 5 minutes, okay. When I started with EPA, we were just volunteer EJ positions, but since then, 3 years ago to now, we have a fully staffed environmental justice team doing the work that I'm kind of mentioning today. So here, we'll share these slides, but we have 11 amazing staff right now. A lot of it is to do with the investments in EJ and more funding opportunities, which I know I'm supposed to talk about in a moment. But again, some of the ways that we're integrating EJ is internally, I feel like for so long, environmental justice is a checkbox to a lot of different programs and organizations, and we don't want to make it a checkbox. We want to make it a component of work that's going to enhance a project, that we need to involve community experts from the beginning of developing a plan. Too often we show you the plan, we ask you for feedback, and we're like, great, maybe we'll take it, maybe we won't. But wouldn't it be better if we involved everyone from the beginning of that process and that planning? Again, it's not an easy solution, but that's some of the ideals that I'm really trying to hone in on with the component of work of environmental justice. And thankfully, we have 11 staff to help do that now versus 1. And again, we're just supporting communities with EJ concerns, and so creating spaces for you all to come talk to us. we do host now a monthly community check-in. So if you ever want to come yell at us, the first Tuesday of the month is the place to do it from 5:30 to 7 p.m., and I'll share that link soon. But that's just one way, and we're also trying to be present with everyone. That's why I'm here today. I don't think EPA has ever historically been to this event, and I'm happy to be the first maybe, but we're trying to be on the ground, seeing what's happened. We can listen about it from a Zoom link or a Microsoft Teams link, but until we're there on the ground, you show us what's going on, that's where the real impact sets in our minds. Grants. So that's exciting, I know, but I think that's a perfect example of programs we have within the agency that have barriers within them. Raise your hand if you ever tried to apply for an EPA grant. Anybody in this room? Is it fun? No. Is it? Do you want to apply for our grant programs? No. And even just in my 3 years experience, realize, my goodness, it's a headache. How can we make this easier? How can these funds be beneficial for communities? And I don't have the right answers right now, but we are trying to stand up new programs. And so we do have more funding, which is amazing. We're talking $3 billion that are investing in EJ-related activities to our nation. And so we have about 5 different programs coming through the line. And the first one I really want to highlight, it's called the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, TICTACs. Acronyms are the best, I know. But you know, this program, we awarded 2 in our region of $10 million each to be technical assistance centers, and that's helping CBOs get grant writing experience, just how to manage federal funds, the base level to build your own capacity to one day be more competitive for larger pots of funding. And so this takes away the barrier of going through grants.gov or, you know, can't hire a fancy grant writer, but hopefully this program will provide the technical assistance to communities in need. It's a new program, and so I'll share my contact, but be on the lookout for more information being provided later. And this is just some more information on our Technical Assistance Center. They're going to be hosted through the University of Arizona and San Diego State. Who can receive services are all community stakeholders, including underserved communities, community residents, nonprofit organizations, grassroots organizations, local and state government entities, tribal governments. So please be on the lookout if this is something that interests you, and I'm happy to answer more questions. And I have 1 minute left, so I'm just going to go to the other part of why I'm here is recruitment. We're hiring like crazy, which is pretty different or a big change for the federal government. I think this is a huge movement for us as an agency. I mean, we're 50 years old, so a lot of people are either retiring or moving on, but we're having so much more young and bright young minds and to come change the ways we function as an agency. So if you're students or you know students or looking for a career in the EPA, please come talk to me. I entered through an internship program as a grad student. One of my grad colleagues over here who I know, so shout out to our grad program way back in the day, just 3 years. Sorry, I feel like I've been in it forever, but not really. But please, come talk to me after this program about internship opportunities, because it is a new wave. If we can change the agency's mindset with new, bright ideas, and that's the way to do it, you know? And I think that's my chat. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, CJ. And now we would like to welcome back up to the stage Reuben Crowfeather, Standing Rock, Lakota, who will be presenting about how to affect change in the face of power. He will be telling us a little bit about his story at Standing Rock.
Oh, thank you, Jose. If we could have the slide up, por favor. Estoy aprendiendo a hablar español. We really want to be able to communicate with our Spanish-speaking indigenous relatives, and so I'm committed to learning to speak Spanish, but it's also very important that we go back and we research where we come from, the different tribes, the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Danae, the Otomi, the Mishika, the Yaqui, the Chichimeca, all the different tribes that we come from. Do I have a clicker here? Let me see. Mitakuye oyasin. Okay, here we got an image here. It says, we are here to protect water. Water is life. Mini wichoni. Can you say mini wichoni? It's been a basic, not basic, but at the front of all of our prayers since the beginning of time. We know that water is sacred. And for those of you who are not familiar with our fight in 2016 against the Dakota Access Pipeline, our nation, the Standing Rock Sioux Nation, is located 45 miles south of the biggest city in North Dakota, which is the capital of Bismarck, which is 90% of European American ancestry. And so there in Bismarck, they lobbied the pipeline was set to go just north of Bismarck, but the people there, the community there, they fought against that, and they in turn moved the pipeline down into what is the very border of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. And so again, environmental racism. There, the Dakota Access Pipeline was pumping oil from the Bakkens to what is Illinois. And our people obviously rose up and made a stand and said, no, we're not going to allow this pipeline to go through our lands. And at the forefront of our movement was our children, our youth. And this image here, if you can see, it shows our youth who ran 1,600 miles from Cannonball, North Dakota to Washington, D.C. They ran there during the No DAPL movement. Many youth groups were formed and created that, like the International Indigenous Youth Council. And these youth went back to their home communities, their home tribes, and they brought the environmental justice fight. Water protectors, the water protectors, they put their lives on the line. Many different actions, non-violent direct actions, that they would stand in front of bulldozers, they would cuff themselves to bulldozers, they would stand in front of law enforcement. And you see in the background here of our water protectors is our great chief, Tatanka Iotaka, Sitting Bull. And throughout history you hear his name, Sitting Bull. And one of his quotes that he left with was, let's put our minds together and see what kind of future we can create for our children. And so in the spirit of Sitting Bull, the water protectors, they faced many attacks by private security firms that came and they brought dogs. They faced the Morton County Sheriff's Department. They also faced the National Guard, who was called in. And you see here some of the images of the brutality, police brutality that they faced there. To the left there is a 20-degree a 20-degree night, freezing weather, and the water cannons that they were doused with also had chemicals. And so it was chemical warfare that was brought upon our water protectors. And the chemicals burned their skin, it burned their eyes. And to this day, our relatives, our water protectors, are suffering from PTSD from the abuse that they received there at Standing Rock. No spiritual surrender. Many of them were incarcerated, charged with felonies. They were held in dog kennels. They were held naked, much like you would kind of expect, like with national terrorist treatment. They were treated like terrorists. The No DAPL movement, there was a lot of positive things that came out of the movement. And here you see leaders from throughout Indian country coming together. You see all the flags representative of all the indigenous tribes that came together. All the indigenous tribes along with our allies who came together. And if it wasn't for our allies, they would have wiped us off the face of the earth. There was a young European-American girl who was shot in the head with a rubber bullet and took her ear off, and that made national headline news, and that's what really got the national attention. How did we fight this institutional racism? How do we fight it? We fought it by education. We used social media, but we went after the corporate sponsors and their banks. And once we started to move into defunding the big oil, then we got the national attention. The youth ran to Washington, D.C. to meet with Barack Obama, and when he was there, he promised them that he would. He ordered an environmental impact study, and which actually halted the easement of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Here he is pictured with our children. It's my niece up there in the corner. And so President Barack Obama came and showed his support. To this day, the environmental impact study has not been done. And so we're waiting for Barack to follow up with that. But as soon as he left office, this guy comes in. And within 72 hours of Donald Trump being inaugurated, his first move that he did was he ordered a fast track to not only expedite the Dakota Access Pipeline, but also the Keystone Pipeline that was going through South Dakota at the time. Again, no spiritual surrender. And the question that I'm trying to look for that question that they had for me. I didn't get it till just before it came up. And so the very first and foremost of our movement was a spiritual movement. In the beginning of everything that we do, we begin with that prayer. And the first time that I was called to the front line, I got a phone call from my uncle. And he said, Toshka, nephew, he said, we're calling all the warriors to the front line. And at the time, I was 8 hours away in Minnesota. That was about 11 o'clock at night. By 8 o'clock in the morning, I was pulling into our reservation lands. And as I pulled onto our reservation lands, I seen more law enforcement than I've ever seen in my life. It was like the president had got killed or something. I've never seen so many police presence. And at the time, there was just a few women that were lined up and they were yelling at all the police officers. And I looked around and I was like, where are the warriors? Where are the warriors? And I seen some prayer altars that had been set up. And so they had begun with the prayer. And in the time that we were standing there, we had blocked the road to the pipeline. They pulled in a bulldozer behind the police line and they built a new road. And so just within that time, within about an hour, they built a new road. And so that was what we were facing. But again, from the prayer that we made, it was the most important component to the fight. How do you affect change in the face of power? We've seen Donald Trump. How do we do that? Voting. The most powerful thing that we have right now in order to combat this is voting, and so we have to get that to all of our allies, all of our people. How does your philosophy and relationship with nature inform your approach to addressing environmental justice? That's a good question. Water is sacred. One of the things that we do in our tribe is that we'll go without water for 4 days. And when you've gone without water for 4 days, you will know the true value of water. Miniwi choni, that water is life. And that's our spiritual answer to that question. Do I have a timer? We're getting 5 minutes. Okay, so at this time, I would like to answer any questions. Are there any questions? Kind of. We're here on Yes, sir. Local officials ignore them most of the time. Yes, sir. Can bring them out and they want them to support something that the local power structure wants to do. How can we overcome that kind of co-opting and that kind of hypocrisy? How can we reach out to our community members here within these lands? It's very simple. It's very simple. We reach out to the tribe. We talk to them. We connect. We connect with them. We need to see a representation at the government level. That's a good question. Any more questions? I'm sorry. I think I need a drink of water. Okay, so let's get back into my thing. This question kind of throws me off here. So as of now, the Dakota Access Pipeline is currently illegally pumping gas as we speak. So people think, oh, did we win? Did we stop the pipeline? No, we did not stop the pipeline. And so we need continued support for that. One of the key things that we learned is that when we mobilize our tribal nations throughout Turtle Island, that we can bring awareness to the rest of the world. And at Standing Rock, that's one of the things that we're very, very proud of. We might not have stopped the Dakota Access Pipeline, but we we enlightened the world about the issue with environmental justice. And so, yeah, I think I'm sorry. I'm getting a little bit nervous here, but yeah, any more questions? I think that's going to wrap it up for me. How do we make those changes? And that's a question, we always, ask ourselves, the personal things that we do, the imprint that we're gonna leave here on this earth. It goes back to the basic, are we gonna recycle? Are we gonna look for alternative energy resources? And how do we do that? I mean, that's a good question. What are your thoughts on land acknowledgements without meaningful actions? Oh, I think it's environmental racism right there. It's environmental racism. And again, I'm from the Midwest, South Dakota, Minnesota, and till I came to California, I never heard of a land acknowledgement. I've never heard of a land acknowledgement until I came here. Any more questions? Yeah, so how can they be doing it? Illegally. The way they do everything else when it's not, they go against illegally. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure about that question, though. Thank you. So, Okay, at this time, we'll be closing here, and I want to thank you all for your kind attention. I want to thank you all for all the work that you're doing within your communities. And to answer the question, how do we make that change without the spotlight? In our everyday walk of life, mita kuye oyasin, when we have respect for life, when we have respect for our relatives, when we listen to our relatives who speak about environmental racism, in this room, in this county, we have such a low population of African American blacks. We have a high population of Latinx, but they're facing rent that they cannot pay. Where we have indigenous people here who have no representation, from what I'm understanding here today. And so, again, I thank you all for your kind attention, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'll hit you to a low.
Thank you to all of our presenters. We would now like to welcome each one to the stage for a Q&A session. So we're going to get these seats ready for all of you.
And if you have any questions you haven't submitted yet via the QR code or written, please submit it now. And if you have a written comment, please lift it so we can come gather it.
So this first question is for everyone. Can you comment on the use of the terms environmental racism versus environmental justice?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think these concepts are definitely related. I do think because I think structurally about power structures. I think we can resist at the local level, of course, and in our individual lives and everything like that. But collectively, when we collectively get together and resist full-on power structures, we need to think in terms of what those are. Some of those names will be familiar to us. It depends on which category of power we're talking about. Capitalism, for example, it is an oppression of the working class and poor by the uber rich, right? The ones who own the means of production. We talk about gender oppression, or cis heteropatriarchy. That is an oppression of people who are not heterosexual, who are not cis men, by those who are, right? And likewise, when we think of it, we were talking about structural racism, which is an oppression of Black, Indigenous, and brown people by those who are white, who are settlers, who are colonizers. And so depending on which category of oppression and power structure you're talking about, you can talk about it under the rubric of environmental justice. Environmental justice pertains very much to several people who are white because they're poor, because they're working class, right? They may be placed in situations, they may be devalued in terms of the local zoning decisions that are made, right? So capitalism, oppresses, in ways that are not racialized as well as in ways that are racialized. It's always kind of racialized, but still there are ways that, environmental justice can apply in that sense. Environmental racism, however, specifically is a specific category of that where I would say it's talking about, the specific ways that structural racism is connected to the environment. So that's what I would say is kind of the distinction between the two.
Sure, I can add on to that. I wanted to hand it off to the experts first, but I think it's just about educating ourselves. You need to learn about environmental racism in order to do the work in the realm of environmental justice. If we don't do that internal work first about learning about everything they mentioned in their presentation today, or if you're not learning what's going on the ground from what you're experiencing and you're right now, is if we don't have that in my head, then how can I move forward and try to right the wrongs within agencies like the EPA? So I know it's a very basic level answer, but we're all here for reasons to learn, and that's the first big step at how we make our decisions moving forward. So,
for this next question, it reads, what can I do to make the greatest impact on a daily basis?
So this is always an interesting question for me because people love to race to what can I do. And I think doing something is really important. But don't forget that understanding the problem on a deep level is doing something, right? All this study we did, that was we did a lot of study, right? And part of doing something is learning and really trying to get a deep understanding of what the problems are. But besides that, I just have to say, hopefully nobody's mad at me for saying this, but we need to get radicalized. Climate change, or we should say climate crisis and destruction, is real. And a lot of us ain't going to be here too much longer if we don't do something about it. And I don't mean just the normal, everyday campaigns, but somebody got to stop it. In its tracks, right? Protest is great. It's only one form of doing something, okay? Protest is great, gives us awareness, that kind of thing. And like he said, water protecting, that's what we should be doing. And when we protect our homes, a lot of times we protect our homes with all kinds of things, including weapons, right? I'm suggesting that if we don't do something really drastic really soon, we're going to be in trouble. And that's going to mean a lot of death, right? It's not to be the alarmist and, but it's real. Thank you. The other thing is really understanding the impact, not just of ourselves. A lot of times what we like to do is talk about individuals. Okay, I got a car with a battery instead of gas, right? Or something like that. Our own footprints. What we have to understand as a country, our own footprint is way bigger than everybody else's footprint. We have to stop consuming. It is what it is. And that's one of the reasons why capitalism can't be the answer. We have to stop consuming just for no reason. If I were to tell you how much clothes I have in my closet that I don't even freaking wear, right? That consumption is what is killing the earth. If we want environmental justice, this has to be a structural change. And that happens in so many ways. So yes, act locally, react to the problem, but we also have to go on the offensive to the problem.
Would anyone else like to add to that? What can I do to make the greatest impact on a daily basis?
What can I do on a daily basis? At a pivotal time in my life, I had a choice. I was a young leader in my community, and I had a choice of the political or the spiritual. And at the time, I chose the spiritual. And so sometimes when I share my thoughts, I kind of feel like I'm just that person that that people think I'm crazy. But prayer is the most important tool that I utilize each day, and that I teach my children, I teach my nephews, I teach my nieces, my daughters, my sons, my friends, to lead by example that prayer. And they tell us that, everywhere a way of prayer is a good way. It's a good way to do it. But when we do that, we set that spiritual tone from the beginning. In the moment, we center our spirit, we center our heart to our mind, and we put we put what's going to be in front of us, and we go out and we do it. So for me, It's that prayer and centering myself and staying focused. And I believe with the power of that manifestation of the prayer that we can make these changes. And like my sister here said, we have to get up and fight. And some of that time, that's the prayer. We have to pray for that strength to stand up. We have to pray for that strength to send our voice. We have to pray for the future. And so again, not to sound cliche, but that's really where I'm at in my life. Thank you.
And I guess to make it cliche, no, I'm just joking. I think just being leaders in your community, like everyone here, is to promote protecting our environment, and just everyone's voice is important. Honestly, I walked in today and saw the lineup of amazing speakers, and I was scared, intimidated, and nervous. Like, what am I gonna bring to the table? But just, I think in the last hour, we're all talking about the same things that we are trying to accomplish. Like, we want the same goals, and I think we all have to realize we're all on the same level, and we are just fighting for the same things. And it doesn't matter, where you're coming from, or if you're a high school senior, just like, how do I make a change? Like, you're doing it now, and the fact that you're here, you're doing it now. So.
All right, our next question is environmental justice about affixing blame and punishment, or recognizing that previous generations and their horrible decisions do not represent the current generation and our point of view, and that the current generation wants to actively participate with our communities of color?
That's a good one. Forgiveness. They say we can't forget, but we can forgive. For our people, so many things that have been done to us. Our people live in a state where they're always ready to crash out. When they learn the true history, they become upset and they crash out, whether it's in drugs, alcohol, violence, prison. We learn that truth. When we hold that pain, when we hold that, it becomes a sickness to us. It becomes a spiritual sickness. When we learn to let those things go, then Tokatakia, we can go into the future. They say that when we hold on to things, it's like dragging buffalo skulls. And if you heard anything about us, we drag buffalo skulls around. But when you learn to let those things go, you can go forward freely. And so how do we do that, as Oyate Wanjila, one nation, not to point blame and point fingers, but at the same time, it takes everybody coming together.
I think if I say, ouch, and someone looks to me to see if what they're doing is causing my ouch, a change is possible, right? But if I continually say ouch, and most people are not looking to see what's causing the pain, to see if there's anything they can do about it, then that means carrying forward. I have to do, not blame, not, in the sense that we usually think of, blame as in, like some kind of bitter thinking, right? But in terms of analysis of what is causing the problem, right? We usually think of blame in terms of something emotional that people do. And because this society is a very cis heteropatriarchal society, we devalue the emotional, even though the emotional is information as well, right? So blame shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem for me to say that I am a victim of a certain system, right? But because this society puts this emphasis on don't be emotional, be rational, and don't call yourself a victim. Don't let people put you in that position, right? And there's something to that, right? But there is, in fact, if you go into court and you say somebody hit me over the head and took my wallet, you are in fact a victim of a crime, right? That's factual, right? So people talk about it in these emotional terms as a way of discrediting it because emotions are associated with women, and with other non-men, and that's a disempowered group, right? So I think, you know, shifting our thinking about how we think about these things is part of addressing the problem. But if it would be better for somebody to think about it in a different way than to say blame, right? Because there is somebody to blame. Like when Trump did what he did, he was to blame, right? And all the people who were following him doing it, like Stephen Miller, Stephen Bannon, everything like that, you know, they were also to blame for those problems going forward, right? But if you don't think in terms of blame, you can also think in terms, and I do this myself because you're right, carrying the weight of what we study a lot of times is horrendous, right? It's horrendous to think about these things and to just kind of see, oh yeah, genocide of the Miwok people, you know, depopulation of the African continent, you know, all these things, and just be like, whoa, what am I thinking about? Where do I fit into that? Where do my ancestors fit into that? Where are the people who I love, who I'm related to, you know, connected to, or who I just know, how do they fit into that, right? It's heavy, right? So sometimes what you have to do is you have to kind of take a scientific distance from it and say, I have to conduct an analysis because there is a problem that I want to solve. And whoever is causing that problem to be persistent, even if they don't know it, I have to find a way of addressing them so that they stop, because I'm saying ouch. Everybody like me is saying ouch. The indigenous people are saying ouch, right? Women are saying ouch. You know, queer people, trans people are saying ouch. There is a power structure that is causing them to say ouch, and we need to address the problem.
Yeah, so just to add to that, it's if I'm honest, that's an uncomfortable question for me, because I almost feel like it's pointing at us as if we're the ones blaming and not thinking about what needs to happen. And I just want to say I will be proud to blame those who are in power, right? I really would like to kind of put that back and say, has racism really ended? Or has it just shifted positions, right? And it looks just a little bit different today than maybe it did at the beginning of the 500 years that we've been going through, right? Could it be that slavery just changed positions? That it was the slavery thing that was everywhere, and then it went to the prison industrial complex and convict leasing, and that still our relationship with the police is one where we can be killed and nobody be punished for it? Is it not that the problem is still there? So let's say it's funny, I'm gonna give a plumbing thing. If there was, because he's a plumber, if there was a leak in your house and it was rotting the floorboards, should we be like, well, I don't feel like really talking about this leak? No, guess what? You're going to call a plumber, and somebody's going to come fix that leak before your house is so rotted that you can't live in it. Let me be clear. We as black people, and I'm going to say indigenous people and everybody else, time's up. We are done. We have gone through generations after generations after generations. We can talk about slavery. We could talk about braceros. We can talk about all kinds of ways that America goes and gets immigrants when they want them, uses them up, sprays them down with chemicals, and then sends them back. We can keep talking about it, or we can do something about it. I don't have time necessarily to worry about whose feelings are hurt with pointing the finger. Because guess what? My literal life is at stake here. People of color's literal life is at stake with environmental racism. I have friends, we've been to South Africa several times, I lived there. I have friends who literally don't have access to water and electricity. So I don't have time for worrying about who I'm blaming. I have time for us to sit here, think about what is the problem. Racism is a problem. Some people aren't benefiting from it. Some people at the expense of others. And I have to, even as myself, as a cisgendered woman, I know that I'm benefiting from something that transgender people and non-men are not, or transgender people are not benefiting from, right? I'm benefiting from it at the expense of them. So I'm fine. I want to do everything. You can put the blame on me, because I want to do everything that I can do to make sure that that doesn't happen. My children and my children's children should not be talking about the same crap that we're talking about. But yet, we are here talking about the same crap since the beginning of America. So it's time to stop. Time's up. We don't have any more time.
That was amazing. I want to talk to you more. You know, I think just out of this question and with all that experience that was just shared, I received 2 pieces of advice from Robin Collins. She's now the Senior Advisor of Environmental Justice to Michael Regan and all of EPA. But she told me, keep running until someone tackles you. And if you get tackled, just get up and keep running again. And that was just kind of a quote to, you know, how you approach your work and whatever career level you are at currently, and that's how you make change. The second piece of advice, especially when your work is rooted in working with communities, is I think on the opposite side of blame is for all of us to own up to our mistakes. So often we're just running away from a mistake we might have made, and you can see that in many examples where we're just shifting blame here or there just to not be responsible. But me personally, in my personal life and my professional life, I think that's something we can all work on, is just right away say, I screwed up. Let me try again. Especially, you know, with EPA, we're standing up so many new programs. We acknowledge we're probably going to screw up a lot. But if we don't screw up, we're not going to make the best program that will help communities in need. And so I just took those 2 pieces of advice very to heart and really root them in the way I function as a person and in my professional life now too. So that's.
Are there any final words before we close our program? Oh, yeah.
I always have words. I'm a Taurus. I talk all the time. Okay? But, I mean, for me, the final word is to think of things like this. There's an inertia that's going on that started with the beginnings, probably before America, but the beginnings of America. An inertia of capitalism, of racism, patriarchy, these different types of things, right? And that inertia is going to keep going even if we do nothing. We don't even have to push it. We don't have to intentionally want to hurt people. It's just going. And if we don't, if we want it to stop, we have to stop it. We have to dismantle these systems and create new ones. You can't just sit back and think it's going to end. It's going to get bigger. If you think of it like a snowball and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you have to actually dismantle it, actually put some action towards it. And to me, that's where we're moving. That's what we want to do. Stop that snowball and get off the hill or something, you know, and like figure out how we're going to make a different system.
Yeah, and just kind of piggyback off of that, if we all made different choices in our lives, like it could hypothetically happen, right? That each individual in here, each individual in this room, in our world, could make a different choice tomorrow. Like not tomorrow, like immediately, right? You can start a new life, a new year at any moment. Time is not bound by the Gregorian calendar, right? Like we could decide to stop pumping oil out of the back-end fields through the unceded indigenous lands, right? We could decide to do that. But if we chose to do that, if it somehow happened, something would happen that would lead to other choices that we would then have to make. If we respected indigenous lives and land and traditions that much, something else would have to happen because so much is connected to that, right? And at the end of that, there would be other things that we had to choose. And at the end of that, there would be still other things that other choices we would have to make. By the end of what happened, we would not necessarily recognize the thing that was in front of us as America or the thing that was in front of us as the modern world. Because the modern world is so much based on indigenous death and genocide, so much based on enslavement and death of Africans and black people, right? So much based on the dispossession of poor people, right? We would not recognize it. But what I think we pray, my prayer is that we can let go of the vision that we have of this modern world, this world that we live in now, enough, and just focus on the people who need us to let go of that vision. Their lives depend on it. Our lives depend on it, right? We could hypothetically do that. I will not hold my breath, but we could do that. We could take the moment to make that change. And at the end of what the changes that we would have to make, we would not recognize what we would see, and hopefully, my prayer is that that would be just fine.
Oh, thank you. At Standing Rock, one of the things that we learned is that the corporations, they will stop at nothing. They will stop at nothing. The law. So what we need to do is educate our youth. Again, the youth were at the forefront of our movement. Education, filing lawsuits, and for all you people out there right here in this room today, the future is dependent upon you. To the work that you guys are doing, the things that you're going to be doing, and we need you. We need these voices. We need these strong feminine, these strong masculine voices, these strong voices that haven't been heard for so long. And so I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for for having us here today, to Cien for inviting myself to speak and to share this day with you. And I wish you all a great week.
I'll just say Earth Day is every day.
Can we get an enormous round of applause for our incredible speakers? Please shower them in love and prayers. The future is changing right here. And we will just close with a commitment from Cien. This is the first of many conversations. Cien is committed to continuing to cover this topic, and we hope you will continue to embody what you learned here today and join us for all of the conversations as we continue to lean into environmental justice. We have enormous gratitude to our incredible speakers. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise and prayers with us. Thank you to our audience for being a part of this conversation and engaging and taking what we've learned today and embodying it through action immediately. What can you do? Anything. Just get started. Our next event is on May 19th, where we're centering youth voices, and we hope you will join us for that. We also invite you to a post-program mingling space to debrief and discuss the topics we've covered today. We have this space until 2 o'clock, and we hope you will continue to stay and converse with us. That is it for our program. Thank you so much for being here today.
Cuando las calles solas están, casera de mi corazón.